Hello again and welcome to Forum for a Better Understanding. It was so good being here last week with you on the first of a 4-week series on immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform. We looked at something that was passed last week. Now we're looking something forward this week. We're going to crack open a document called A New Path Toward Humane Immigration Policy. And we have guests today from the American Friends Service Committee who are working at a project called Pan Valley Institute here in Fresno, who are going to help us crack open 7 principles that are given in this document which just came out. My 2 guests this time happen to be Myrna Martinez Nateras, who happens to be the executive director of the Pan Valley Institute, and to her side is Estela Galvan, who is the assistant for programs there at the Pan Valley Institute. So Myrna and Estela, welcome for joining the panel after last week that you saw that program. What is it that you'd like to tell us as we begin this program, the importance of this issue for all of us who are watching this program?
Thank you, Jim, for inviting us. Well, we are very pleased that you are going to do this series. The last week program was really very educational. We have the opportunity to hear from the family's perspective what it means to be undocumented here, but most importantly, how important it is that we start this dialogue again and that we start working towards immigration reform.
Stella.
Likewise, I concur with Myrna that the importance of having more dialogue, such as you had last time, and also more and more to get more people involved in knowing and understanding the human side to how it affects many, many families, and not just immigrant families, but everyone. And it's a global issue, and but it's great seeing it on a local perspective as well. So,
One person we haven't met on the table in a while is Bishop Steinbach, but every week he gives us a pastoral message. So we're going to run one from 2 years ago when he was very, very concerned over the failure of comprehensive immigration reform. So Greg, if you'll run that pastoral message, you're going to hear Bishop making some points that we think are more true today than even when he said them 2 years ago.
The following is a pastoral message from Bishop John T. Steinbach, Bishop of the Diocese of Fresno.
My dear people of God, it is disturbing to hear people comment on the TV and radio that the failure of a comprehensive immigration bill is a victory for the American people. Rather than a victory, it is a travesty of justice and a moral failure of our legislators to respond to the unjust and totally impractical immigration laws of our country, which will now lead to greater injustice in our great land of America and greater polarization of the American people. It is sickening to hear those same commentators and politicians speak words that show total disrespect for the undocumented, words that can so easily lead others to hatred and prejudice, and to hear them condemn good, hard-working, decent people who live with strong moral and spiritual values. Our immigration laws were written many years ago and tried to respond to the situation of that day. In the setting of today, those laws are totally unjust and immoral. And our legislators have failed to respond to their responsibility to give us laws that take our present reality into account. Instead, many say, deport all the undocumented, when our government cannot even deport the criminals amongst the undocumented, and build more walls, rather than make the law for which they have the responsibility to enact, to respond to the present situation of a nation in need of workers to maintain our very economy. Who are greatly responsible for the making of the dreams of so many Americans a reality? It is the thousands and millions of undocumented workers who are busy harvesting our fields so we can have food to feed our families, who are construction workers who build the homes people dream to live in, who build our skyscrapers and malls and factories, and who actually are the hope of keeping our very social security system viable. On and on we can comment on the good that the undocumented do for our country. Without the undocumented, our fields would go unharvested, our construction business would slow, many a restaurant and hotel would close, and so on in about every area of the production, distribution, and consumption of goods in our economy. The words engraved on the Statue of Liberty have little meaning to many these days. Quote, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free," unquote. Christ is present in our midst in the many hard-working people and their children who came to this country illegally because our immigration laws are both impractical and unjust. The law of God, the natural law, the right to work for and better one's family, takes precedence over outdated, unjust, and impractical immigration laws. And our legislators failed to respond to one of the greatest needs of our country. Let us pray for our country, for our legislators, and for the many commentators, for all immigrants, both documented and undocumented, and above all, for our beloved country of America. God bless you all very, very much.
This has been a pastoral message from Bishop John T. Steinbach.
You know, hearing Bishop again, and it wasn't the only time, it wasn't like one pastoral message. I have a whole series of them, and if anyone is interested in either the very film that you just saw, that disc, or the script, the text of Bishop's pastoral messages on comprehensive immigration reform, on the injustice of the system, on the fact of the seeing Christ in the migrant. And if you want to see this both in English or Spanish, I have 8 of these texts available. So you could call us 488-7440 anytime for the text or the disc. I wonder if Myrna and Estela would begin with something that moves beyond where Bishop ended. It's a document called A New Path Toward Humane Immigration Policy, which might be good for us to figure out. That's why you're here today. We could post right now on the screen those 7 principles, and then while they're being screened, tell us how it was that the AFSC came up with these 7 principles of a completely revised immigration policy. How did they come up with something like that?
Well, the American Friends Service Committee started an initiative that is called Human Migration and Mobility. And in the 9 regions where we have programs, we have been working with immigrant communities, supporting them in their organizing efforts. So we have witnesses what immigrants have been through all these years in looking for an immigration reform. So we have done a lot of work with the community and do some community consultations in terms of how do they see an immigration reform. So this is like their voices of what they consider a humane immigration reform. So really this is a document that reflects those consultations.
We just showed you briefly, in case you were wondering, what were those 4 things we just saw? They were 4 of the 7 principles that the American Friends Service Committee worked out as Myrna described. Why don't we show 5, 6, and 7? Let it be there for a second. And Estela, tell us a little bit maybe about how important it is that this document that's going to flesh out these 7 documents, 7 principles, why we need these to be used. Why do we need people to get this document?
We need people to get this document because, as Myrna mentioned, it comes from the perspective of the people directly being affected by this, and communities, families being separated and so forth. So we really want to get this to our city council members, our president. Obviously, AFSC is planning to send this document to Congress as well. So it's outreaching to as much people as want to get a better understanding of how AFSC sees a humane immigration reform. So those are the reasons why this document is very valuable to share with as many people as possible.
You know, we have sevens in the Catholic Church, big time. 7 sacraments, 7 days of the week, 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, and we have 7 principles of humane immigration policy. And it's going to be interesting to see why and how these 7 get separated from each other, how they become 7 legs on a table if you have a big table, 7 steps, 7 directions, 7 integrated policies that need to blend together to create something that's comprehensive. Let's look at the first one. Did you want to introduce us to that first of the 7?
Yeah, the first principle is that we think that it's very important to create justice with humane economic policies. What is this about is that we have, as many studies have shown, immigration really is the result of economic policies. And we have seen after the free trade agreement was approved, this created displacements in what they call the third world countries. So many people has been forced to leave their communities and look for jobs. So we think that it's very important to support the development of the communities from where immigrants come, because that's the only way that could be one of the ways in which the immigration issue can be resolved on the long term.
Now, how important is it to stress the economic policies that are underlying comprehensive reform? I think people think of immigration as being like something you can legislate with walls. You can stop it from happening. Why are you thinking that the first principle is you must look at the economic policies that are setting up the problem in the first place?
Well, because I think that many people, many times we think that immigrants come because they decide to do so, and in some instances maybe there is people who has that opportunity of choosing to immigrate. But in the majority of the cases, and I'm talking specifically about Mexico, many people is forced to leave because they don't have jobs. So they live in countries where they don't, or what is happening right now in the rural areas, they don't have support for the agriculture. So they are literally forced to leave their country. So they don't have a job, and that's what we think that so we really need to understand why people leave the country in order for us to say why the economy is so important. And many people really don't see that it is because they are forced. But at the same time, we also need to see the needs of the United States of workers that are paid low salaries. That's the other aspect that we really need to understand.
We will be back in 1 minute, but right now it's that time we take our break, so please don't go anywhere. We'll be back with Myrna and Estela for the other 6 principles coming right up. Stay tuned.
KNXT TV is proud to say thank you to all its viewers who have given their support for over 25 years. And only through your support is KNXT able to provide spiritual and informative programming. Please remember KNXT in your long-term support through wills, bequests, trust, and plan giving. Your gift is important to the future of Catholic television. Help preserve the strength of KNXT's message based on the teachings of Christ. Keep KNXT in your future plans.
Welcome back to the second half of our program today, in which we're cracking open a document called A New Path Toward Humane Immigration Policy. There are 7 principles we're opening up. We've just described the first. Now Estela Galvan is going to introduce us to the second principle and why that is going to be an important part of our full, comprehensive, integrated, fully useful and viable immigration reform. Estela.
Yeah, and Principle 2 is very much connected to Principle 1. They're all very connected. And as Myrna mentioned earlier, having the understanding of why many people come here. And when they come here and get jobs, they are not even get paid well. So they sacrifice come here and still doing jobs that that their labor rights are not protected. So AFSC felt that Principle 2 and again, what people felt in the community was to protect the labor rights of all workers, native-born as well as immigrant families or immigrant, to live decently and support their families. I mean, obviously, that's something that should be universal. Although we do have to say that AFSC does reject any form of temporary work type of program. What AFSC would like to see is just overall across the board having labor rights protected for all workers. And among some of the recommendations is to end guest worker programs and strengthen, implement, and monitor labor and employment laws, including Fair Wage, Standards Act, the National Labor Relations Act, and their state equivalents to that. So that's something that's very important for AFSC in regards to Principle 2, really looking at how all workers are entitled for humane policies under the labor laws here.
The word that they capitalize on this one actually is all, and that's important. Protect the labor rights of all workers. You know, we kind of like pick and choose and decide the worthy workers or the workers we're going to take care of or the immigrants, the good immigrants. The AFSC and the Catholic Church don't distinguish in that way. They have another way, calling them all God's children and therefore deserving of a dignity, respecting their proper human value. What's the third principle, Myrna?
Well, the third principle is very much related to what we hear Bishop talking about, the need of having an immigration reform, and what we call to create a clear path to permanent residence. Immigration reform is understood in many different ways. In your last program, Attorney Jessica, she talked about the understanding of immigration reform, but sometimes it's more inclined to reinforcement. What we mean by immigration reform is to give the right to people who is undocumented here. We don't know exactly how many, but it's estimated that about 12 million undocumented immigrants live in the United States. So I think that there has to be a way to give these immigrants the opportunity to go through a process in which they can become permanent residents. We have family, what they call blended families where there are different members have different immigration status, and that is creating a lot of distress in the families because you can have a resident, citizen, or an undocumented member of the family. So we really urge for this opportunity for immigrants to look for a permanent resident.
So we've done 3, there's 4 more left. That would bring up the fourth principle. Tell us what it is, Estela, and flesh it out just a little.
Principle 4, yes, it's to respect the civil and human rights of all immigrants. AFSC felt like immigration policy should be to protect the immigrant rights for travel, migration, rather than criminalizing people for coming to this country, but how to protect them as well, their rights here as human beings. I mean, because in the end, that's one of the things of protecting the rights of human beings. And as you know, in the last 3 years, I mean, it's increased with detention centers, blocks, checkpoints, and so forth. So having to cease those kind of in the detention centers being deported and so forth. And one of the things as we saw in the documentary in Busca, and because families and people, communities still live in fear. So that's another thing that, in a way of shedding more light on like why we are ceasing to stop on the raids and detention centers, checkpoints, because of the fear that people live constantly of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow or the next week and so forth. So, yeah.
The fourth principle is one that was really fleshed out very nicely last week in the program with the panel we had in Search of a Future and Busca de un Futuro. If you remember that program, it's centered on point 4. These rights of immigrants must be respected. End the arrest, the detention, the deportations, halt community sweeps, checkpoints, and roadblocks, as Estela said. That already is another point in the comprehensive reform. It's only one of 7, but it is the 4th. It's important that we start doing that in every state. Some states are much more able to handle immigration, it seems. They're just less militaristic about it. They're just more humane about it, and it works better for them. Now, the 5th point is really political. It's really stepping out there, especially because it's an international relationship issue. Tell us about the 5th point, Myrna.
Well, the 5th point is, like you said, it's very political, but as I said before, some people call for immigration reform, being more inclined to reinforcement. And the principle 5 talks about demilitarize the U.S.-Mexico border. We are very concerned because the U.S.-Mexico border is now, we know that it's patrolled not only by the police, the ICE police, but it's also by military. So, and one of the big concerns for our American Friends Service Committee is that by doing this, we are criminalizing immigrants, people who, as we said before, come here in search of a better life, in search of a future, like the DVD says. And so we think that there is no, and also the attorney, Jessica, she also mentioned that she doesn't believe that really this is a solution, and this has created a lot of conflicts. There are hundreds and hundreds of immigrants that die every year trying to cross the border.
Yeah. And on Democracy Now!, this very day that we're taping this program, there was an issue of one of the persons being arrested for having just put out those water jars to save the many, many people who have died crossing the border, and for that humane effort, he's been arrested, of course, and is being prosecuted, and is it's such an ironic type of a prosecution for doing something as humane as to save people from dying in the desert. So it's a very complex issue, but the 5th one is to demilitarize the border between the U.S. and Mexico. It's just important that we don't avoid that issue as being, oh, that's beyond us, we can't handle that. We have to, it's the 5th step. What is the 6th one, Estela?
The 6th one's also very fleshed out on in Search of a Future and Busca, and that the panel before also shared about the to make family reunification a top priority. That is no separation of families. So that's one of the Principle 6, and one of the recommendations that AFSC puts is that to meet the global demand on immigrants to be reunited with their families by eliminating the cap on the total number of family-based visas, because each year there's a certain cap that is put on how many people should get visas, which it's done arbitrarily of how that goes about, and each year it takes more and more years for families to be together as a whole, and the legal sense of the matter. So, so that's always a part of the humane, just immigration reform and humane reform of having families be together.
Now, this one is fleshed out in an email I just received today from the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. So it proves that the Quakers and the Catholics are on the same page. It would be Senate Bill 1085. And what it's arguing for is family unification. And it's an effort that the bishop in charge of the Committee of Migration, Bishop Wester of Salt Lake City, wrote this appeal to the Senator Robert Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, to support that effort and to ask the Catholic community, which is a large political bloc, to please tell your senators, because it's a Senate bill, so we have to call Boxer and Feinstein to remind them vote up on Senate Bill 1085. It's family reunification, and they find it a very positive step towards comprehensive immigration reform. Which brings us, Myrna, to the 7th point. We may actually get all 7 done today. Aren't we good? What's the 7th point, Myrna?
Well, the 7th point, the last one, and it was interesting what you say about the 7th, but I don't think it was intentional. But anyway, is to ensure that immigration and refugees have access to services. We see that immigrants not only are not well paid for the hard work they do, but they are denied basic services that are, we consider, human rights, like access to health care. We see really a problem with in the families that they don't have access to health care, so they have to sometimes go without attention, medical attention, and also have the right to the other public benefits, and because they work hard, they contribute to the economy of this country. So we think that these are basic human rights.
We have to close our program today, but we'll be back again, believe it or not, next week with another panel on this topic. We're going to be looking at it from the group called Faith in Community. So we're going to be seeing it from a congregational point of view. What can believers from different churches and organizations who are faith-based, what can they do concretely to put the faith that they find in their scriptures into practice? Comprehensive immigration reform is something very political. It's very, very real, and yet it can also find its support in something very spiritual, namely our own faith convictions. Let's see you next week. God bless.